Airline police harass black woman, but she's an undercover federal investigator. Have you ever wondered what really goes on behind the scenes at busy airports, where thousands of anonymous travelers glide through security every hour? Picture this: a seemingly ordinary black woman, dressed comfortably for a cross-country flight, steps into the bustling terminal of John F. Kennedy International Airport. She's polite, calm, and minding her own business until airline police single her out with unrelenting suspicion. Little do they know, she's not just another passenger, she's an undercover federal investigator who has the power to expose them. The drama that ensues will shake the foundations of everything we think we know about airport security. The day began like any other for Tiana Ward. She woke up before sunrise in her modest New York apartment, anxious about her scheduled flight, but determined to go through the motions as casually as possible. Everything, from her outfit, a grey sweatshirt, black leggings, and white running shoes, to her faded backpack, was chosen to help her blend in with the crowd of travelers. With a slender build and a warm, affable smile, Tiana moved through life with quiet grace. Only a select few people knew her secret. She worked as an undercover federal investigator, operating covertly to root out corruption in areas where the average person would never suspect it existed. There was something about airports that always made her heart pound just a little faster. The overhead announcements, the frantic footsteps of late passengers sprinting to their gates, the whir of suitcase wheels across polished floors, it all built a hum of tension that Tiana knew how to navigate. She was no stranger to covert operations. In fact, she'd been on a string of them recently, investigating claims of racial profiling and unnecessary force used by certain airport law enforcement units. Today's mission was no different, or so she thought. By the time she arrived at John F. Kennedy International Airport, the sun was rising, casting its orange glow over the labyrinthine structure of terminals and gates. The building itself was bustling with people from every corner of the globe. Tiana paid for her taxi, stepped out, and immediately blended into the crowd. She passed the sign that read Delta Airlines, Departures, heading into the swirling mass of travelers checking in. Despite the early hour, the lines moved quickly, and Tiana soon found herself guided by the bright overhead screens to her assigned kiosk. She wanted to keep a low profile, just another passenger heading to Atlanta for a weekend trip. However, the details of her assignment weighed heavily on her mind. For months, she had pored over complaints and stories of people who had been stopped, frisked, or worse, by airline police, especially those who belonged to marginalized communities. Some rumored that certain officers enjoyed humiliating travelers they perceived as suspicious. Her job was to gather enough evidence to make a case, to discover if these incidents were isolated or part of a sinister pattern. Each step she took in that airport, each polite smile to an agent or security guard, was carefully measured. She needed to see how she would be treated if no one suspected her of being a federal agent. It didn't take long for tension to rear its head. After checking in, Tiana made her way to the Transportation Security Administration (TSA) line for the routine screening. Although she traveled light, a single carry-on bag, she was mentally prepared to be singled out for a random screening. That was part of her job, after all. Yet, to her mild surprise, nothing out of the ordinary happened at the TSA checkpoint. She walked through the body scanner, her bag was scanned without alarm, and she moved on to the concourse. This relief was bittersweet. While she was thankful for an uneventful check, she wondered if her mission would yield enough evidence. Then again, it was still early in the morning. The concourse sparkled with fluorescent lights reflecting off smooth tile floors. Shops and restaurants were already open, dispensing coffee, pastries, and last-minute souvenirs. Tiana found her gate 28 for a Delta Airlines flight to Atlanta. She quietly took a seat in the waiting area, scanning her surroundings with practiced efficiency. Families with young children lugged strollers and diaper bags. Business travelers pecked away on their laptops, sipping hot coffee. College students sprawled across seats, half asleep. Nothing seemed amiss, but Tiana had learned not to trust first impressions. A short while later, the overhead announcement crackled to life, calling for boarding for Flight 762 to Atlanta. Tiana grabbed her boarding pass, queued up, and filed into the jet bridge, intent on continuing her standard routine. As she reached the aircraft door, she felt a tingling along her spine, an instinct honed from years in the field. Someone was watching her. She glanced discreetly over her shoulder. Two uniformed officers from the airport police stood at the gate podium, scanning the line of passengers as they boarded. She noted how their gaze lingered on her a few seconds longer than on anyone else. Had they already taken interest in her? Her posture remained calm, face neutral. She took her seat 14A near the window. She was ready. If something was going to happen, she was prepared to let it play out the way it needed to. Her entire operation hinged on letting these officers tip their hand first. But the flight took off without incident. Tiana gazed out the window as New York's skyline disappeared beneath the clouds. She closed her eyes, resting while the flight attendants passed out beverages. At cruising altitude, she allowed herself to exhale the tension that knotted her shoulders. Her phone, now in airplane mode, was worthless for communication. In a few hours, she'd land in Atlanta. She tried to decide how to spend her weekend under the cover story of visiting relatives. She briefly wondered if she'd come back with enough evidence. 2 hours later, the captain's voice announced their imminent descent. The flight had been smooth, almost too peaceful. Tiana tried to quell her nerves by reminding herself that not every mission yielded dramatic confrontations. Sometimes the proof was in the quiet. No blatant harassment could mean certain areas of the complaints were exaggerated, or perhaps the offending officers weren't on duty this time. She promised herself she would remain vigilant until she was safely out of the terminal in Atlanta. Touching down at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, Tiana joined the throng of travelers stepping off the plane. The terminal hall was a frenzy almost unbelievably larger and more complex than JFK in some respects. She proceeded toward baggage claim, though her only piece of luggage was the modest carry-on. As she walked, she noticed out of the corner of her eye a pair of airport police officers, different from the ones she'd seen in New York, flanking a corridor that led to an administrative area. Once again, she felt the distinct burn of eyes lingering on her. She thought, maybe I'm just being paranoid, or maybe the alert about me has circulated faster than I expected. Her federal role was top secret, but any number of small mistakes could compromise an operation. She turned her gaze forward, deciding not to dwell on the hunch. If they wanted to approach her, they would. She wouldn't force a confrontation. Part of her training included letting things play out naturally. As she left the concourse, her phone buzzed to life, reconnecting to the cell towers. She paused to check messages, standing near a row of chairs by a window overlooking the tarmac. Just as she was about to dial her rideshare, 2 uniformed men airport police strolled over. One was tall with a muscular build and a stern jawline. His name tag read Officer Reynolds. The other was shorter, wiry, with sharper eyes that darted all around as if scanning the environment incessantly. His name tag read Officer Graham. They closed in on her, their faces unreadable. Tiana braced herself. "Ma'am, can we see your ID?" Reynolds asked curtly. "We've had a report of a suspicious individual fitting your description." Tiana's heart pounded, but she maintained a calm facade. "Suspicious? I just got off a flight from New York," she said, softly, reaching into her pocket to retrieve her driver's license. Graham's lips curled slightly, a hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, we need to verify who you are and why you're here in this terminal," he said. in a tone that suggested it wasn't a request. People passing by started to stare, giving Tiana a wide berth as if she were radioactive. Her mind raced. She had no warrant out for her, and there was no legitimate reason for them to suspect her of wrongdoing. This was precisely the kind of scenario she was investigating. She handed them her ID, deciding to play the compliant civilian rather than flash her government badge. If she revealed she was a federal agent too early, she might lose valuable insight into their typical conduct. Reynolds took the ID, scanned it suspiciously, and handed it back to Graham, who ran it through a small handheld device. A minute passed, though it felt like an hour before Graham frowned and turned to Tiana. "That's quite a generic name," he said. "You're from New York City?" Tiana nodded. "Yes, from Harlem." He paused, glancing at his screen. Then he leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "And what's your purpose here in Atlanta? Business or personal?" "Personal," Tiana replied, keeping her voice calm despite the adrenaline surging inside her. Reynolds took a step forward. "You travel often, Miss Ward?" "Occasionally," Tiana answered, sticking to half-truths. She traveled often, but not in the sense they were implying. Graham cocked his head. "You got any contraband on you?" he asked, his tone flippant. "Drugs, weapons, anything we need to know about?" Tiana's stomach twisted. The question was phrased to provoke a defensive reaction. She kept her composure. "No, officer. I'm just visiting family." At that point, other travelers were gawking, some whispering. The tension in the air was electric. Tiana didn't want to cause a scene, but she also needed to document their behavior. Her phone was still in hand from checking messages. She tapped it as if to open an app, subtly turning on her camera to record the interaction. She angled it discreetly so it captured the officers' faces and voices. "Could you step over here, please?" Reynolds gestured to a less crowded area by a row of shuttered kiosks. Tiana acquiesced, uncertain how far they would push this. "We're going to ask you a few more questions. We've had a tip about suspicious individuals, and we're investigating thoroughly." "Officers," Tiana said, working to keep her voice steady, "I've complied with you. I've given you my ID. Is there something specific you're looking for? Because I'd prefer to get on with my day." Reynolds' gaze flicked to Graham, then back to Tiana. "Don't get smart with us. We're just doing our jobs." Graham stepped around Tiana, blocking her potential exit. She caught a faint whiff of something like stale coffee on his breath. "Empty your pockets, Miss Ward," he said firmly. "I'd like to know on what grounds," Tiana replied, channeling a quiet but firm presence. She knew that the average person might submit without question, but her training as an investigator told her to push back. If these men were indeed overstepping, it needed to be recorded. "Our grounds are that you match the description of a person suspected of carrying illegal substances," Reynolds snapped. She stared at them, eyebrows raised. "Who gave that description?" "I'd like more details." "That's classified," Graham said, crossing his arms over his chest. "Empty your pockets now, or we'll have to do it the hard way." A flicker of anger coursed through Tiana. She slowly pulled out her cell phone and the few bills she had on her, along with some gum wrappers. That was it. She had nothing else to show. Reynolds and Graham exchanged a glance. Seemingly disappointed, there was no contraband. Before Tiana could say a word, Reynolds grabbed her arm. "We'll take you in for further questioning," he said. That was the tipping point. Her pulse hammered. She was well aware that once they tried to physically move her somewhere else, the risk to her safety and the potential that they'd break protocol skyrocketed. Her cover operation stated she should only reveal her identity if threatened with bodily harm or imminent arrest under false pretenses. The moment had arrived. She'd garnered enough from the conversation, she believed, to show undue harassment. Now it was time to protect herself. She locked eyes with Reynolds. Her voice was calm but with the resonance of authority. "Take your hand off me," she said, "or you'll regret it." His eyebrows shot up. "Is that a threat?" Tiana reached into her jacket pocket and with deliberate caution extracted a folded black leather wallet. She flipped it open to display her federal credentials for a brief second. "This is who I am. I'm a federal investigator with the Department of Justice. You are assaulting a federal officer right now." The color drained from Reynolds' face. Graham's cocky smirk disappeared. People who had gathered to watch the commotion let out audible gasps. Tiana let the moment hang there, the badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Reynolds released her arm instantly, raising his hands in a gesture of placation. We got a call. This is just a misunderstanding," he stammered. Graham took a step back, looking like he might bolt. Tiana lifted her phone, which was still recording. "I've captured every word of your so-called reasonable suspicion officers. I think you have some explaining to do." Her voice was cold, controlled. "Now, would you like to continue, or shall I contact my superiors at the DOJ and have you both placed on immediate administrative review?" Graham's eyes darted around. People were filming with their phones, capturing the entire fiasco. Tiana had them cornered legally and socially. She had no intention of letting them slip away. This was precisely what she had been sent to discover, how easily some officers could abuse their power if they perceived a passenger was vulnerable. The tension hung like a thundercloud in that corridor. Finally, Reynolds cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience. We were just following protocol." Tiana raised an eyebrow, lips pursed. "Protocol? Do you often detain travelers for no reason and physically grab them when they ask for an explanation? Because that's not the kind of protocol that squares with the Bill of Rights." Graham clenched his jaw. "Look, we can sort this out with our supervisor, okay?" Tiana nodded. "Yes, we will. Let's go." She knew this was a pivotal moment. She had them on the ropes, but the bigger fish might be higher up the chain. If these men behaved this brazenly, their superiors might be complicit. A thorough case demanded she go wherever the rabbit hole led. With that single command, Tiana turned the tables, and it became clear that the next step would involve unveiling a network of corruption deeper than she had imagined. Inside a nondescript office in the security wing of Hartsfield-Jackson, Tiana found herself seated at a metal table, the room lit by a single overhead fluorescent lamp that buzzed faintly. Reynolds and Graham fidgeted by the door, having lost their earlier bravado. A short while later, a tall woman in her mid-50s stepped in. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her uniform bore the insignia of a senior officer. Her nameplate read Captain Eva Morales. She offered Tiana a professional, tight-lipped smile. "Miss Ward, one understand there's been a misunderstanding," Morales said calmly, though her eyes were steeled with caution. Tiana leaned back in her chair. "Captain, I appreciate you taking the time to see me. I'm a federal investigator, as you can see." She passed over her credentials again, more formally this time. Morales studied them meticulously, her face betraying nothing. "I'd like an explanation as to why I was stopped and physically detained by your officers for no apparent reason." Morales let out a measured breath. Officers Reynolds and Graham reported receiving an anonymous tip about a suspect on your flight from JFK. The suspect was described as matching your appearance. They acted on that tip. "I'm sure you understand that we have to respond rapidly to such calls." Tiana tapped her fingers on the table, eyeing Reynolds and Graham. "I do understand the importance of responding to threats. What I don't understand is why they escalated the situation without proper cause. They demanded I empty my pockets, forcibly grabbed me, and only released me when they realized I'm a federal investigator." Morales folded her hands behind her back. I can't speak to the exact sequence of events in the hallway, Miss Ward, but I assure you we'll conduct a formal review. If there was any misconduct, Tiana's voice cut through Morales' carefully balanced words. Captain, I also have a recording of everything. This is more than a routine review. The Department of Justice has received multiple complaints about racial profiling and harassment at major airports, including this one. I believe your officer's actions today support at least some of those complaints. I'm duty-bound to pursue this matter, so let's cut the pretense. You and I both know if I were not a federal investigator, I might be in handcuffs right now for no justifiable reason. Morales' cool composure wavered for a heartbeat. She glanced at Reynolds and Graham, who shifted uncomfortably. We value transparency and fairness, she said slowly. If you insist, I'll have to ask my superiors to get involved. I'm sure you have the authority to contact them yourself, but I suggest we handle this internally first, gather all facts, and then we can go from there. It sounded almost like a plea. Tiana considered it. Her instructions were to collect sufficient evidence to make a compelling case. Kicking down the door this early might send everyone scurrying to cover their tracks. She needed to gather more, perhaps from internal logs, from airport surveillance, from other travelers who had encountered these officers. She decided not to blow the operation wide open just yet. I'll accept an internal review, Tiana replied, but rest assured, I'll be forwarding my report to my superiors. That includes the footage. Morales nodded curtly, relief flickering across her face. Of course. Officers Reynolds and Graham, you're dismissed for now. I'll have a word with Miss Ward in private. The two men shot Tiana hostile glances as they stepped out. Tiana stared back, unyielding. Once they were gone, Morales seated herself opposite Tiana, clasping her hands on the desk. Listen, the captain said in a low voice, I don't condone discriminatory or aggressive tactics. But we have to keep a tight ship here. We're understaffed, underfunded, and we get genuine threats coming through these terminals. Tiana's gaze hardened. That doesn't excuse what happened. Agreed, Morales said. But I also know the pressure these officers are under. If they got a tip, they had to act. The question is, did they abuse that tip to harass you? Or was it an overreaction to the tension they face daily? That's what I need to find out. Tiana nodded slowly. Then do it. I'm here in Atlanta for a few days. If you'd like to speak further, you'll know how to reach me. She paused, then added, but I want the internal logs. Everything related to that tip. I want to see how it came in, who called it, the timeline, everything. Morales leaned back, lips pressed into a line. That might not be protocol to share with an outside. I'm not an outside anything, Tiana interrupted. I'm federal. Unless you want me to request a subpoena. A beat of silence passed, thick with tension. I'll see what I can do, Morales finally said, exhaling slowly. I assume you can see yourself out? Yes, Tiana replied, standing up. Thank you for your time. With that, Tiana left the office. She half expected more officers to materialize and detain her, but none did. Instead, she slipped back into the airport corridors, heart still pounding. She had to go deeper. Someone had deliberately phoned in a bogus tip about her, either from JFK or at Atlanta. That meant her cover might be compromised, or, at the very least, the corrupt officers had a system in place to single out certain travelers. She intended to find out which. Tiana stepped outside into Atlanta's humid summer air, her mind swirling. She had arranged for a rideshare to take her to the small Airbnb she had rented. Before that, though, she couldn't resist calling her supervisor, Special Agent Andrea Baker, from a secluded corner of the pickup area. She needed to provide an update and verify if there was any new intel on her end. The line clicked, and Baker's crisp voice came through. "Ward, you in Atlanta yet?" "I am," Tiana replied, glancing around to ensure privacy. "We've got a situation already." I was stopped by 2 airport cops within minutes of landing. They used an anonymous tip as an excuse to harass me. It escalated until I had to show my badge. Baker's sigh was audible over the phone. "We suspected it might be that bad, but this is quicker than expected. You think your cover is blown?" "I'm not sure yet. It's possible. Or it might be they just used me to fill a quota of some kind, or they recognized me from a watch list that had me flagged for some reason." "I'll keep digging." "Good. We've received multiple formal complaints from travelers about those anonymous tips. Rumor is there's a ring of officers who use them to extort or harass. Keep your eyes open, Tiana. This might run up the chain." A beep signaled Tiana's ride-share driver had arrived. "Understood. I'll keep you posted." She hung up and slid into the back seat of a black sedan. The driver, a chatty older man named Leonard, greeted her warmly. "Welcome to Atlanta," he said, merging into traffic. "Business or pleasure?" "Pleasure," she lied smoothly. "Visiting family." Leonard nodded, launching into a story about how the city had changed over the decades. Tiana half listened, half lost in thought about her next move. She needed to see those internal logs Morales mentioned. In the meantime, perhaps she could find travelers who had lodged complaints and interview them. One name stuck out in her memory from a report she'd read: Charlotte Brooks, a college student who had claimed brutal treatment by airport authorities just 2 months prior. If Tiana could locate her and get a statement, it might paint a clearer picture. The Airbnb was a small apartment in Midtown, tastefully decorated with quirky artwork. Once inside, Tiana locked the door, dropped her bag on the couch, and powered up her laptop. She typed a quick email to a contact in the TSA, requesting discreet cooperation in obtaining any relevant security footage from that morning's arrival in Atlanta. After sending that off, she searched her files for Charlotte Brooks' phone number. She found it tucked in a footnote of the official complaint. Dialing the number, Tiana wondered if Charlotte would be willing to speak, or even answer a call from an unknown number. The phone rang. Once, twice. "Hello?" A cautious young woman's voice answered. "Hello, is this Charlotte Brooks?" Tiana said, standing by the window, gazing out over the Atlanta skyline. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Tiana Ward. I'm investigating incidents of harassment at Hartsfield-Jackson for the Department of Justice. I came across your statement." There was a pause on the line. "Is this a joke?" "It's not. I know you made a complaint a while ago. I'd like to hear your side of the story. I can't guarantee we can fix it overnight, but your cooperation might help us build a stronger case against those officers." Charlotte sighed, a tremor in her voice. "I'm still traumatized by it. They treated me like a criminal for no reason, accused me of carrying fake IDs, then threatened to strip search me in a locked room. I was so scared, I couldn't breathe. I'll talk to you, but it can't be tonight. I need time to prepare myself." Tiana nodded, though Charlotte couldn't see it. "I understand. Tomorrow then? Morning or afternoon?" "Afternoon. Around 2. I'm near the campus at Georgia State. We can meet in the library if that's okay." "That's perfect," Tiana said. "Thank you, Charlotte. I promise I'll do everything I can to help you." After hanging up, Tiana sank into the couch. Relief mingled with adrenaline. She had a lead, but she felt a twinge of pity for Charlotte, imagining what she'd gone through. The fear, the confusion. Tiana had only experienced a taste of it earlier in the corridor. She was a trained agent. Charlotte was just a college student. How many others were out there who never filed a complaint or were too frightened to come forward? That night, Tiana managed only a few hours of restless sleep, haunted by thoughts of corruption hidden behind polished badges and official procedures. She replayed the confrontation with Reynolds and Graham in her mind. She saw the arrogance in their eyes, the swift shift to fear when they realized who she was. And she wondered who's pulling their strings, because she suspected that if they were bold enough to do this in a public corridor, there might be more powerful figures behind them. Morning found Tiana sipping black coffee at a local cafe, finalizing notes on her laptop. She had no illusions about how dangerous her mission could become if she poked the wrong people. It wasn't just about airport police showing their biases. It could be about entire systems of profit or power. Maybe bribes, maybe rackets. She had encountered too many hidden webs in her career to think this would be a simple case. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Captain Morales. I have some of the logs you requested. Internal procedures limit how much I can share electronically. Let's meet. 11 a.m. South Side Staff Entrance, Terminal 3. Ask for me at the security desk." Tiana's eyebrows rose. She typed a quick acknowledgement. While she was still cautious about Morales, the captain had extended an olive branch in the form of those logs. Gathering evidence was vital. She checked the time, 10:15 a.m., and signaled for her check. She needed to head back to the airport. By 11 a.m., Tiana was walking through the staff entrance of Terminal 3. The security desk was manned by a bored-looking guard who barely glanced at her. She asked for Captain Morales, as instructed, and was told to wait. Moments later, Morales emerged from a nearby corridor, clad in her uniform but minus the stiff formality she had in the office the day before. "Follow me," Morales said tersely. Tiana complied, silent as they crossed a hallway lined with tinted windows. Eventually, they entered a small conference room. The humming fluorescent lights gave the drab walls a sickly cast. Morales closed the door, then pulled out a stack of printed documents from a worn folder. "These are logs of calls made to our tip line over the past month," she said quietly. "I've highlighted the ones made around the times that might correlate with your arrival yesterday, and also some other calls that showed a pattern of targeting passengers who turned out to be innocent." Tiana accepted the stack, flipping through pages, names, timestamps, short descriptions of suspects. The majority were mundane, some concerned lost items or suspicious packages. But a handful of them had an eerie similarity. The suspect was described in vague terms that always included being black or dark-skinned, with no further distinctive features. Typically, the calls came from a disposable phone number or even untraceable VoIP lines. "There's something else," Morales said, her voice dropping. "I did some digging and found that the same phone number was used multiple times in the past few weeks to lodge anonymous tips. It's not from the public. It might be from inside the airport or a burner phone used by someone who works here. We've never had the resources to figure it out, or the impetus. But after your incident, I got curious." Tiana felt a jolt of excitement. This is precisely the pattern we suspected. Someone, maybe an officer or a group of them, could be generating bogus tips to justify profiling certain travelers. Then they can conduct searches, maybe even intimidate people into paying bribes to avoid legal trouble. Does that ring a bell? Morales' expression hardened. "I've never seen an actual bribe in my precinct, but I'm not naive. It could be happening behind closed doors. If my officers are involved, it would be a serious betrayal of everything we stand for. But I can't go on hearsay. That's why I'm giving you these logs, albeit quietly." Tiana leaned in, dropping her voice. "Captain, if you're helping me, you should be aware that things might get dangerous. Corruption can run deep, and people will do desperate things to protect themselves." Morales held Tiana's gaze. I know, she said, steely. I've been with this force for 30 years, and I've seen what desperate men will do. I want the rot cut out. If that means helping you, so be it. Tiana nodded slowly. Thank you. I'll go over these. If I find something actionable, I'll be in touch. With that, she tucked the documents into a slim briefcase she'd brought and carefully headed back into the bustling corridors. A flutter of nerves gnawed at her stomach, like stepping into a dark tunnel without knowing what lay ahead. At around 2 p.m., Tiana arrived at Georgia State University's library to meet Charlotte Brooks. She found the young woman hunched over a laptop in a quiet reading nook. Her curly hair framed a round face marked by tension and anxiety. When Tiana introduced herself, Charlotte offered a timid smile and motioned for Tiana to sit. Thanks for agreeing to see me, Charlotte said. Her voice trembled slightly. Of course, Tiana replied, adopting a soothing tone. I'm here to listen. Take your time. Charlotte took a deep breath. It started when I arrived at the airport for a flight to visit my grandparents. I passed through security fine, but once I got to the gate, 2 police officers approached me. They said there was a report. I had fake IDs and was involved in financial fraud. I laughed because it was so absurd. I'm a broke college student, but they didn't find it funny. She paused, swallowing hard. They took me to a back room, said if I didn't comply, they'd arrest me. I showed them my license, student ID, bank cards, everything matched. But they kept at it, saying I was lying. They forced me to unlock my phone. They went through my photos, my messages. It was humiliating. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I asked to call my parents or a lawyer, and they said I didn't have the right to do that yet. Tiana clenched her fists under the table. Did they do anything physically to you? Not exactly, but they hinted if I didn't cooperate, they'd do a strip search. I was terrified. One officer acted like he was going to do it himself, which made my skin crawl. She wiped at her tears. Eventually, after hours, they let me go. I missed my flight. I filed a complaint, but all I got was a form letter saying they'd look into it. No one followed up. Tiana's blood simmered with anger. I'm sorry you went through that. I promise we're building a case to stop this. Did they mention an anonymous tip? Charlotte nodded. Yes. They said someone had called me in as suspicious. But how would anyone know who I was? I wasn't doing anything except waiting for my flight. They never explained who made the call. It felt like they just used it as an excuse. Tiana took notes, her heart heavy. Thank you for telling me. This is incredibly helpful. If needed, would you be willing to provide a statement or testify? Charlotte hesitated, anxiety flickering in her eyes. If it means stopping them from doing this to more people, yes. I'm just scared they'll retaliate. Don't worry, Tiana reassured her. We'll do everything we can to keep you safe. As they finished talking, Tiana noticed a figure near the library's entrance. He seemed out of place, older than the typical student crowd, wearing a plain polo shirt and jeans. He caught Tiana's gaze and quickly looked away, disappearing behind a row of shelves. Alarm bells rang in her mind. Was she being followed? She wrapped up with Charlotte, offering a supportive smile. Stay strong. I'll be in touch. Charlotte thanked her and departed, head bowed in relief. Tiana lingered, scanning the library. The suspicious man was gone. She tried to shrug it off. It might just be her nerves. Still, a sense of foreboding weighed on her. Someone might be tracking my movements. Leaving the library, she walked to the main road, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. The hot Atlanta sun pounded the sidewalk. She reached for her phone to summon a rideshare when a black SUV pulled up near the curb. The window rolled down, revealing Officer Graham's sneering face. Fancy seeing you here, he called, voice dripping with sarcasm. You investigating something? Tiana froze, adrenaline spiking. On my personal time, she answered coolly, but thanks for checking in. Graham opened the door and stepped out, the engine still running. He moved onto the sidewalk, hands resting casually on his belt. "You're making waves around here," he said. "My partner and I? We're not too happy about it." Tiana forced a calm smile, though her pulse hammered in her throat. "Do you have something to say, Officer Graham? Because if not, I suggest you move along. You're way out of your jurisdiction harassing me like this." He chuckled, low and menacing. "Just letting you know, there's a lot you don't understand. You might want to tread carefully. Next time, your fancy badge might not save you." He tipped an imaginary hat and slid back into the SUV. The vehicle sped away, leaving the stench of intimidation hanging in the warm air. Tiana stood there, skin prickling. This was bigger than a few rogue officers messing with travelers for kicks. This was a network that felt secure enough to threaten a federal investigator in broad daylight. She inhaled shakily, steeling her resolve. "I won't be intimidated. I've come too far to back down." That evening, Tiana pored over the logs Morales had given her. Indeed, the call singled out travelers, mostly people of color, for nebulous offenses. The phone number that recurred was untraceable, at least on the surface. Tiana recognized the pattern, likely a burner phone purchased with cash, used solely for these tips. But who was behind it? Her phone buzzed. A text from Baker. "New intel suggests certain officers funnel unsuspecting travelers into false arrests, then extort them. Also hearing rumors that some supervisors might be involved. Be very careful." Tiana shuddered. She suspected there was a racket, but it was chilling to see it confirmed. She thought of Charlotte, threatened with a strip search and humiliated in a locked room. A scenario ripe for extortion if the officers demanded money to make it all go away. The next question: how high does this go? Determined to make progress, Tiana decided to pay Captain Morales another visit. She texted, "Can we talk in private? Need more info about possible superiors involved." An hour later, Morales responded, "Meet me at the West Terminal Staff Lounge, 9 p.m. after my shift." Tiana arrived promptly. The staff lounge was nearly deserted, with a lone vending machine humming in the corner. Morales, still in uniform, waved Tiana over to a small table. "I'm off the clock," the captain said, rubbing her temples, "but I'm risking a lot helping you." "I appreciate it," Tiana replied, sliding into the chair opposite her. "I need to ask, do you suspect any superiors in your chain of command are involved in these bogus tip arrests?" Morales frowned, swirling the coffee in her paper cup. "I can't say for certain. I do know we had a new deputy chief assigned last year, Frederick Barnes. He's been pushing for higher arrest numbers, claiming it's a deterrent. But I've heard rumors he's been meeting with certain officers privately." She leaned forward, voice dropping. "Officers like Reynolds and Graham." Tiana nodded, adrenaline surging. That might be the missing link. If Barnes is pressuring them to inflate arrests, it could encourage profiling. Or worse, extortion. Morales sighed, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to burst in. "Listen, Barnes has connections. He's in tight with some political figures in the city. If you plan to go after him, you better be sure you have ironclad evidence." Tiana responded, her voice resolute. "Understood. That's exactly what I'm working on. If I can track the burner phone to someone connected to Barnes, we'll have a start." Morales tapped her phone screen, eyes darting anxiously. "I'll share any shift schedules, rosters, or official logs I can access without raising suspicion. But if you dig too fast, they'll notice." Tiana leaned back, a grim smile forming. "We'll do this carefully. Thank you, Captain. I promise we'll bring them down." Late that night, Tiana received an email from her TSA contact. Attached was a file, partial surveillance footage of her arrival at Hartsfield-Jackson. Tiana watched intently. The angle showed her stepping off the plane, phone in hand. Moments later, Reynolds and Graham appeared, but then the feed cut to a different camera, one that showed the corridor from behind. She spotted a figure in the corner, phone pressed to his ear. The angle was blurry, but the figure wore a navy polo and dark trousers. Could that be the man who called in the anonymous tip about me? She squinted, freezing the frame. If only she could see his face clearly. The airport cameras were apparently subpar in that section, or the vantage points were limited. Still, there was enough of a silhouette to identify a tall man with broad shoulders. She saved the screenshots, hoping to enhance them later. I'll get the rest of the footage, Tiana thought. Maybe from different angles, or from different days, to see if he appears again. If the same man was always near a phone around the times these tips were called in, it would be damning evidence. At around midnight, Tiana's phone buzzed again, a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A distorted male voice spoke. "You're playing with fire, Miss Investigator. This is your only warning. Drop your case. Disappear." The line went dead before Tiana could reply. Her mouth went dry. They had her number now. "This means I'm closing in," she told herself. "And they're scared." That resolve steeled her nerves. She backed up all her data to an encrypted drive, wrote a quick summary of her findings for Baker, and locked it all away. If anything happened to her, the truth would still come out. The following day, Tiana discreetly met with 2 more alleged victims of airport harassment. Their stories matched Charlotte's experience: bogus tip, humiliating search, threats of arrest. One person even mentioned paying an on-the-spot fine of $200 in cash to avoid missing a flight. Tiana suspected that fine went straight into an officer's pocket. She had enough to suspect a well-organized scheme. That afternoon, Tiana drove to a downtown government records building to check if Deputy Chief Barnes had any suspicious financial transactions or real estate holdings. She had done a preliminary search online with no significant findings. Now she needed official records. She parked in a crowded lot, scanning the area for any sign of being followed. Nothing seemed out of place. Inside, she combed through digital archives, cross-referencing property deeds and business ownership records. Something pinged her attention: a small LLC called Skybridge Security Consultants, with Barnes listed as a silent partner. Security consultants? That could be a front. She dug deeper. Skybridge had negligible online presence. No official website, just a PO box address. Yet it had bank transactions worth thousands of dollars each month. A chill swept over Tiana. If Barnes was funneling money through this LLC, it might be the stash from extortion at the airport. She saved digital copies, planning to show Baker. But as she emerged from the records office, night had fallen. The lot was eerily deserted. Only a few flickering streetlights offered sparse illumination. She unlocked her rental car with a beep, approached the driver's side and froze. A black SUV was idling at the far end of the lot, headlights off. Alarm bells clanged in Tiana's mind. Too similar to Graham's vehicle, she mentally rehearsed her training. Steeling herself, she climbed into the rental, locked the doors, and started the engine. The SUV's headlights flared to life. Tiana inhaled sharply and pulled out, refusing to panic. She eased onto the road, occasionally checking the rearview mirror. The SUV followed at a distance. As she turned onto a quiet side street, the SUV accelerated. Her hands tightened around the wheel. This was no coincidence. Heart-hammering, Tiana took a few unexpected turns, weaving through the grid of downtown streets. The SUV matched every move. She dialed 911, keeping her eyes on the mirror. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered. This is Special Investigator Tiana Ward, Department of Justice, Tiana said in a quick breath. I'm being followed by a black SUV, plate unknown. I suspect a threat to my safety. The operator asked for her location, but Tiana's gaze flicked to her phone's battery low. My phone might die, she warned. I'm heading toward. The phone beeped and the line went dead. She cursed under her breath. The battery had given out at the worst possible moment. She spotted a busy gas station up ahead, neon lights glowing bright, lots of cameras, witnesses, she reasoned. She swung into the station, parking near the store's entrance. The SUV crawled past the station, not pulling in. She watched it slowly turn the corner and vanish. Minutes passed before she dared breathe a sigh of relief. They must not have wanted a confrontation in front of cameras. Still, the close call rattled her. She needed backup, and soon. Shaken but unharmed, Tiana drove straight to the hotel near the airport, where Captain Morales had said she'd be staying for a training conference. She arrived unannounced, hoping Morales would be in. The captain opened her door, eyes widening at Tiana's breathless state. "What happened?" Morales asked, ushering her inside the modest room. "I was followed," Tiana said, pacing. She explained the black SUV, the mounting evidence against Barnes, and her fear that the ring was bigger than anticipated. Morales sank onto the edge of the bed, rubbing her forehead. "My God, I had no idea it was this far-reaching." Tiana pulled up a chair. "Captain, is there anything else you can tell me? Anything about Barnes or your department that might point me in the right direction?" Morales hesitated, eyes clouded with guilt. I haven't been completely honest. Barnes put me in charge of monitoring certain calls that came through dispatch. He hinted that if I cooperated, I'd get a promotion. I never harassed anyone myself, but I suspect my silence contributed to all this. Tiana's jaw tightened. "Captain, you withheld that from me?" Tears glistened in Morales' eyes. "I was afraid. Barnes has connections that could ruin my career, my life. But you're right, my silence made me complicit. When I realized how far it went, the extortion, the racial profiling, I had to do something. That's why I gave you those logs." Tiana softened. "I understand how fear can paralyze. But you need to come clean fully. We can protect you if you cooperate." Morales took a shaky breath. "Barnes uses certain officers to do his dirty work. Reynolds and Graham are two of them, but there are others. He's convinced them that higher arrests will impress the politicians, that they'll get better funding. But I think there's more to it. Money is definitely changing hands under the table. I've seen Reynolds deposit cash at odd hours, amounts that don't match his salary." Tiana nodded. "We'll bring him down. We'll need your testimony. Are you in?" A tear rolled down Morales' cheek. "Yes, I'm in. I just hope it's not too late to redeem myself." Working through the night, Tiana and Morales hatched a plan. They would orchestrate a sting operation. Morales would discreetly tip Barnes off that a big fish was arriving soon, someone carrying a lot of valuables or contraband, an easy target for extortion. In reality, that big fish would be a DOJ plant. If Barnes and his cronies took the bait, everything would be recorded by Tiana's team, leading to an airtight arrest. But Tiana needed official clearance from her supervisor. She called Baker at dawn, explained the plan, and received cautious approval. "It's risky," Baker said, "but if it works, we'll have them all." By noon, Tiana was back at the airport, wearing a disguise to avoid being recognized by Reynolds or Graham. She donned a brown wig, a cap, and large sunglasses. She had no illusions that it was foolproof, but it might buy her a few extra seconds. The undercover big fish was a fellow agent named Samuel Price, who looked the part of a well-to-do traveler with a sleek suit and expensive watch. Captain Morales went through the motions, logging into the dispatch system as usual. She forwarded a clandestine tip that a passenger matching Price's description would be traveling with a large sum of cash and possibly illegal documents. The plan was for the conspirators to show their hand, hopefully leading to an extortion attempt. Tiana hid in a service corridor near the gate, earpiece in place, listening to Price's wire. Her heart hammered. This was it, the moment that could make or break the entire operation. Sure enough, an hour before the flight's departure, Reynolds and Graham appeared. Scanning the waiting area, they spotted Price sitting calmly in the row of seats. Tiana's earpiece crackled with Price's smooth voice. "I've got eyes on them. They're coming." Reynolds and Graham approached Price, motioning for him to stand. The confrontation began, reminiscent of Tiana's own experience. The officers cited an anonymous tip about suspicious activity and demanded a search. Price played along, feigning anxiety, stammering. They guided him to a side room conveniently equipped with hidden cameras that Tiana's team had installed. From her vantage point, Tiana could see the video feed on a phone. Reynolds patted down Price, while Graham rifled through a briefcase stuffed with prop documents and wads of stage money. Their eyes lit up. Reynolds smirked. Well, this is quite a bit of cash. You might be in violation of federal currency transport laws. Price, in character, asked, "Is there a fine I can pay right now to avoid trouble?" That was the moment of truth. Graham exchanged a glance with Reynolds, then said quietly, "We can maybe make this go away for half." "Half?" Price exclaimed. "That's insane!" Reynolds chuckled. "Better than jail, pal." Tiana could hardly believe the brazen extortion. "We've got them." She signaled the backup team, a group of federal agents waiting nearby. They surged in, flinging the door open, guns drawn. Reynolds and Graham's faces twisted in shock as they were caught red-handed. Tiana burst in behind the agents, ripping off her wig, phone camera rolling. "Officers Reynolds and Graham," she announced, voice ringing with authority, "you're under arrest for extortion, conspiracy, and violation of civil rights." The stunned officers raised their hands, dropping the ill-gotten cash. Suddenly, a new figure shoved through the doorway, Deputy Chief Barnes himself, face flushed with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he roared. Tiana's gaze snapped to him. "Your officers just tried to extort thousands of dollars from an undercover federal agent. This operation is over, Barnes." Barnes's eyes flicked to the cameras, the swarm of federal agents, and he realized it was a setup. With a growl, he reached for his sidearm. "You tricked us!" he spat, aiming at Tiana. In a split second, Tiana dove to the side, adrenaline spiking. The agents tackled Barnes, disarming him. Shouts echoed off the walls. The tension was electric. After a furious struggle, Barnes was pinned, handcuffed, and read his rights. Tiana scrambled to her feet, heart thudding. She locked eyes with Barnes, seeing raw hatred. In that moment, she realized just how deep his corruption ran. He would have shot her to protect his racket. She offered a grim smile. "You'll have plenty of time to reflect on your choices," she said, voice taut. Barnes said nothing, just glared at her as agents hauled him away. Reynolds and Graham, similarly bound, stared at Tiana in shock and betrayal. Their empire of intimidation was crumbling around them. Over the following days, the story exploded. Multiple news outlets caught wind of a massive corruption scandal at one of the world's busiest airports. Headlines read, "Airport police corruption ring busted, extortion and racial profiling alleged." Barnes, Reynolds, Graham, and several other complicit officers faced a barrage of federal charges. Tiana's phone rang incessantly with requests for comment. She offered limited statements, letting the DOJ's official press releases detail the arrests. Captain Morales, for her part, came forward publicly, admitting her role in covering up suspicious calls. She cooperated fully with prosecutors, providing internal memos and logs that further implicated Barnes. In return, she was allowed to resign quietly, avoiding the harshest penalties. It wasn't exactly a glorious ending for her, but it was a chance to start anew. Tiana believed it was the best possible outcome given the circumstances. Charlotte Brooks and other victims came forward with renewed vigor, filing civil suits against the airport police department. Their courage finally rewarded, they had proof that their nightmares weren't isolated incidents. Communities rallied around them, demanding systemic reforms. As for Tiana, she received a commendation for her bravery, yet the victory felt bittersweet. She had exposed an ugly truth, but she knew all too well that corruption could resurface. Still, the sense of justice served was undeniable. In a rare moment of stillness, Tiana sat in her New York apartment, the sun rising over the skyline. She let herself feel a flicker of pride in the knowledge that she had played a crucial part in dismantling a vicious scheme that preyed on innocent travelers, especially those most vulnerable. Justice matters, she reminded herself, and it requires people bold enough to shine a light into the dark places. Though her mission was done, the fight against corruption was never truly over. But for now, there was solace in the triumph. The airline police who had once harassed her with impunity had felt the full force of the law, a reckoning none of them had ever seen coming. We've just witnessed a gripping story of power, corruption, and one woman's bravery in the face of injustice. When an unsuspecting black traveler was harassed by arrogant airport police, it seemed like a tragic tale we've heard too many times. Except this time, the traveler was none other than an undercover federal investigator armed with the authority, courage, and determination to bring down a well-oiled extortion racket. What began as blatant discrimination swiftly unraveled into a full-scale investigation that exposed corruption at the highest levels. In the end, those who abused their badges learned that no one is above the law, and hard karma hit back stronger than they ever imagined. If this story resonated with you or opened your eyes to the urgent need for accountability, don't forget to hit the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more revealing stories. Your support makes all the difference together. Let's keep shining a light on the truth.